Today, we're going to look into our crystal ball and have a look at what's going to happen in 2024. We know we're in for more uncertainty this year, and it's critical that we're prepared for a range of outcomes. For those of you who are regular attendees at our webinars, you know we host these webinars to give you timely, relevant, and valuable information that you can take back to your association and use immediately. These webinars also give us an opportunity to help you see some of the work that we do. So when you're looking for help, you'll think of us. So why does this topic matter? What's in store for 2024? Well, once again, we've got another year of uncertainty, risk, and opportunity. So it's important that we think forward to what might happen this year and be prepared for it. So I think our key messages for today are, number one, prepare for wild cards. We've got a lot of things going on in the world right now that could go in different directions, some of them good, some of them not so good, so be prepared for that. Make sure that you've got a current and updated and recently reviewed strategic plan. Focus on mitigating your risk and focus on seizing your opportunities. For today, we're going to talk first about the big picture. We're going to talk about what's going on from a macroeconomic and geopolitical perspective, and then look at the impact on associations. I'm going to share with you what I see as key risks and key opportunities, and then we'll talk briefly about next steps. So just in terms of looking back to 2023, the good news is we escaped a recession. It wasn't an awful year. Interest rates did come down. Inflation did come down. There's less pressure now on labor costs than there was earlier in 2023. And we are also seeing more interest from sponsors. I'm not saying this is a flood of sponsors rushing out with their checkbooks, but we are seeing a more accommodating environment than we did earlier. In-person event turnout is still a bit of a crapshoot right now. For the most part, I'm seeing lower attendance figures, but I know there's those out there that are seeing very solid attendance figures. So it depends on the community that you're working in. So just be aware that it's hard to say what you can predict for this upcoming year. Now, in terms of the big picture, let's start with the economy. And I'm just going to share with you what pundits are saying right now. I take no responsibility for what they're saying, but the majority seem to be on the same page, which is that interest rates and inflation are going to come down further this year, probably not in the first 6 months, but certainly by the end of the year. It is likely that the Canadian dollar is going to stay low. It is fully expected that our growth is going to lag behind the US. Part of the reason for that is that Canadian household debt levels are quite a bit higher than they are south of the border. It doesn't look like we're going to have a recession in 2024, although it does look like growth is going to be completely flat. Consumer confidence is not in a good place right now. If you are a renter, you're dealing with difficulties in terms of the cost of rent. If you're a homeowner, you're dealing with higher interest rates if you're on a variable rate mortgage. And for all of us, you're dealing with higher food costs, which obviously directly affects putting food on the table. And then on top of that, we have what's going on in Eastern Europe, what's going on in the Middle East, and those aren't the only places where we've got conflicts or potential conflicts. So in terms of the outcome from those economic expectations, we are assuming then no growth. If the Canadian dollar is going to stay low, as the pundits expect, then that's good for tourism and it's good for exports. It means more demand for people coming into the country and more demand for our exports. For imports, not so good. A lower Canadian dollar means our costs of imports are going to remain high or get higher. And let's face it, most of what we as Canadian consumers consume are imports. So that's a consideration. In terms of the conflicts that we've got going on around the world, often these are going to lead to trade disruptions. And anytime you've got trade disruptions, that increases the cost and reduces the supply of what you're trying to get into the country. So what we need to be prepared for is likely ongoing high travel costs, food costs, and housing costs. Also higher insurance costs. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later, but that's a key message that I want you to be thinking about for today. Now, if your members are exporters or their success is measured on export volumes, having higher demand because of a low Canadian dollar is good, but you got to keep in mind that with costs going up, even if demand is good, if they've got higher costs, it doesn't necessarily mean that on net exporters are going to be in a good place. Now, we've talked about the economy. Let's talk about politics and government. In Canada, we've got a federal election coming up and we've got a weak incumbent. The Liberals are way behind and Trudeau is way, way down. So that's something to be thinking about. It does suggest that change is in the air. From a provincial perspective, in 2024, we've got 3 provincial elections, and next year we've got 4 provincial elections. So 2024, those 3 are fully ramped up and ready to go. 2025, they're doing everything they can this year to set themselves up for a win next year. What our federal and provincial governments are going to be focusing on as they head into elections is headline spending. So keep in mind that if you're looking for money from the government, if you're looking for decisions from the government, you got to make sure that what you're doing is aligned with what they see as the headlines that they're trying to focus on. What we see as the headline items are healthcare and housing. And keep in mind with healthcare, it's not open bar on healthcare. Governments are focused on beds, and they're focused on the professionals to take care of people in hospitals and long-term care. It doesn't mean that other aspects of healthcare are going to get additional funding. Focus on housing, that could really go anywhere. But we do need to be aware, and I'm seeing this a lot, and this has been true over the last several years, even if you are in the healthcare sector as a charity or your members are charities or service providers in that area, it doesn't mean there's money for not-for-profits unless you can actually tag on to that headline spending. I know there's a lot of not-for-profits out there that are struggling to continue to deliver the value that they've always wanted to and tried to deliver, but they are stuck way behind the inflation that's occurred over the course of the last 10 years. So in terms of the impact on associations, we have to assume ongoing uncertainty and ongoing cost concerns. I just talked about a challenging government funding environment, and let's keep in mind all of these things are going to have an impact on our members. So what does that mean from a risk perspective? Well, it means that we have the risk of member losses. We have to be aware of that. We have risks associated with higher costs, risks associated with event attendance, and risks associated with labor shortages. So those are some key risks to be thinking about. Now, what can we do about it? Well, we see 5 areas in which we need to mitigate risk. So let's talk about those. First of all, please, as an association, review your insurance in all areas. If your insurance has not gone up, then I would be very concerned that what's happened is the quality of your insurance and the coverage has gone down, because insuring costs have gone up dramatically. So sit down with a reputable broker and go through everything. Do you have all the pieces of insurance you need? Look at the pieces you do have and look at the exclusions on them. What's going to happen if you actually make a claim? What will be covered? What won't be covered? What is your cap? Spend some time looking very seriously at this. I really, really encourage you to do that this year. AI, get out in front of it. Keep in mind that as an association, it's your responsibility to show leadership for your industry. And if AI is something that's going to have a meaningful impact on your industry, you need to be up to speed on it. Whether you as an association are up to speed or you're providing experts to help your members get up to speed, this is going to be on you, and it's going to be important for you to do that. Think about seriously your HR plan for your association. There's likely to be more turnover just because of labor shortages due to the baby boom retirement going on here. So in many cases, you're going to be putting people into positions that don't have the level of training and experience that they have had in the past. So it's going to be absolutely critical that you've got a really good, really thorough training and onboarding program. No more throwing people into a seat and just hoping that they can work their way up. Chances are they're not going to have had the experience they had in the past. And keep in mind, even though there is less pressure on labor costs right now, retention is going to be critical. See what you can do to make sure that your environment is a place that people want to stay, and also make sure from a risk management perspective that you are not entirely reliant on any one person, that you do have cross-training and you do have a backup plan. When it comes to sponsors and members, please remember retention this year. Hold on to what you've got. Yes, it's appealing and important to get new sponsors and new members, but don't lose sight of keeping happy the ones that you've already got, because that is even more important than anything else. Remember, it is always easier to hold on to the members you've got than to find new members. So that leads us to the word of the day, which is retention. So let's talk about opportunities. Our opportunities, we see 4 key opportunities here. And we'll talk a little bit more about each of them. Member engagement and communication, attracting younger members, government relations and stakeholder relations, and efficiency and AI. So let's talk about that. Really, this is all coming down to planning. You need to be planning this year for risk mitigation. How are you going to mitigate against those risks that we talked about? How can you plan for your opportunities? Keep in mind, the opportunities are there, just like your risks are there, and opportunities need to be planned for just like risks. So help to mitigate your risks and help to plan for your opportunities, because success is always about doing both. Please keep in mind too, that whatever's happening this year is always an extension of what happened next year. And whatever is happening this year is going to be extended into 2025. Our geopolitical situation, our macroeconomic situation, that's not going to go away as of December 31st. So make sure that whatever your plan is, you've got a plan for greater than 1 year. And I'm not just talking about your strategic plan, but I'm also talking about risk mitigation as well. So let's talk about member engagement. This is one of our opportunities. Communication. This is something that I see over and over again, and we as association executives tend to lose sight of this on a regular basis. We're moving as fast as we can, we're pedaling as fast as we can, we're doing all this stuff behind the scenes, but we know our members don't want to get overwhelmed with, emails that talk about how many wing flaps that we just did. But at the same time, I do find that we're not spending a lot of time or enough time on communicating what's actually going on. Maybe you're working on something with a stakeholder, or maybe you're working on something with government and you don't have a success yet, or you don't have a next move done. Explain to them what's going on. If you're feeling that you're struggling to get something across or to get something accomplished, communicate that with your members. They will get engaged with that. Don't wait until you've got a loss or a gain to communicate with them. If they don't hear from you, remember, nature abhors a vacuum. If they don't hear from you, they're going to make up their own story. So make sure you're in charge of that story. Now, in terms of member engagement, think about your causes. People do rally around a cause. What are the causes that you can get members to rally around this year? Not too many, but what is one thing you can get members to rally around? Keep in mind, it may not be something that you can solve. It may be something that's completely out of your control. But at a minimum, if you rally around a cause and get your members to get together and help each other, it builds member engagement, it builds bonds with the association, and it helps members feel like somebody's got their back, not just the association, but other members as well too. Keep in mind, this is your opportunity to take a leadership position. And also keep in mind, you can't take on more than you've got the capacity to deal with. So whatever you're doing here, if you're going to take on a cause and take a leadership position, that's going to take resources. So what can you delegate? How can you put boundaries around what volunteers are doing, but still give them scope to do their work? Now, that leads us into the opportunity to attract younger members. Some of these same principles apply. If you want to get younger members involved, first of all, make sure that they know that they're needed and they're wanted. And also keep in mind, people are attracted to organizations where they can see people like themselves. So the fewer younger members you've got, the more difficult it is going to be to attract younger members. The more you've got, the easier it is. So it's a chicken and an egg kind of situation. So where you've got younger members, seek them out, look for opportunities to promote them into leadership positions, and give them training. Give them the opportunity to learn what they need to learn to move into those leadership roles. Sometimes people feel, uncomfortable or intimidated, and this may be even more so if you're getting them on a committee that's dominated by older people, or onto a board that's dominated by older people. Give them the training, and I do find that younger people tend to be more receptive to training. I often find that for those that are in my generation, they kind of think, well, I know all that. I've been there, I've done that. I don't need any training, even though often they actually do. But I find younger members are much more receptive to that training, and it's considered to be much more of value to many people who are in a younger demographic. So make sure you're providing that support. Make sure, again, as I said earlier, make sure you're delegating something meaningful to them. If they're just there to talk and not actually have the opportunity to do anything or make any change, they're going to get disillusioned very quickly. So make sure you've delegated, but give them the boundaries in which to operate. Make sure that they know what lines they can't cross, what is within scope for what they're doing, what is outside of scope, and what is the process that they have to follow to get there. And keep in mind, this is a journey. Take a breath. When you delegate, people aren't going to do things the same way you would have done them. So it's not a question of delegating and having it done exactly the same way you did. So there's probably going to be some anxiety and some uncertainty on your part, about that delegation. It's just part of the way things are. What you will find is there's things that you thought should have been done or could have been done better, no question about it. But the good news is you'll often find that things get done that you didn't expect, that were never getting done before, and are getting done better. So keep in mind, this is an opportunity for you as an association as well to delegate a little bit more and learn more about how you can do something better for your members. Now, let's talk about the opportunity related to government relations and stakeholder relations. As always, it's important to find your niche. You can't be all things to all people. And if you try to spread yourselves too thin, people aren't going to remember what your talking points are. So think about what your niche is for 2024. What are you going to pound on for 2024? What are you going to be focused on? So that every time you have a meeting with government or you see a government representative at an event, they go, oh yeah, that's Association XYZ, and they're focused on this. Remember, people have very short memories, and it takes them a long time to remember all of the people that are in front of them looking for things. So make sure that you've got your niche, and people can identify you this year by a specific area of your niche. Keep in mind, too, that everyone is human. We don't always want to be hearing from other people about what they want from us. It gets tiring. And quite frankly, it feels like a one-sided relationship. So if you want something from your stakeholders, you want something from government, think about what you can do for them. How can you be a solution provider? What is it that they would get benefit from that you can do for them? Always be asking yourself that question. Before you're asking for them to do something for you, think about demonstrating value. And when you're asking them for something, think about, how can I present this in a way that I can present how it's going to be a value of them and value to voters at the end of the day? What is the value of what you're pitching? You've always got to be looking at it from their lens if you want to get results. And that's true of both government and stakeholders. Now, let's talk about efficiency and artificial intelligence. One thing that I find over and over again, that associations spend a lot of time supporting and managing committees, and the board as well, too. That is a separate but related consideration. One thing that we often spend a lot of time on is scheduling committee meetings. This shouldn't be as big a deal as it is, but I know we can burn up an enormous amount of time. And things that I see happening here are, you send out an invitation to half a dozen people, 1 or 2 get back to you right away, others you are chasing and chasing and chasing. That's a problem. Number 2, I see people replying all. So all of a sudden your inbox and everybody else's inbox is all of a sudden getting overwhelmed by people replying all. First of all, think about setting expectations. Let people know that when you send out a message asking for their availability for a meeting, you're going to give them however long. Is it going to be 24 hours, 48 hours? And then you're going to schedule the meeting based on the majority of the responses. And if that's only 20% of the people that got back, make sure people understand that that's what's going to happen. Think about what the tools are that you can use for scheduling meetings. Are you phoning around? Are you doing individual emails? Are there tools out there that you could use better? Is Doodle the right thing to be doing? Or are there better tools that you could be using? Is there some kind of a collaborative tool that you could have everybody contribute to without it being necessarily completely asynchronous? Think about agenda management as well, too. If you want to make sure that your committee work is efficient, you need to have a good agenda, and you need to make sure that the priorities are on that agenda. So whether these are self-managed committees, if they're self-managed committees, give them some training in agenda management so they have some idea of what they can do and how they can do good agendas. Think about using voice transcription as well, too. Taking notes for committees and getting them into shape where the notes are actually going to be relevant can be time-consuming, and sometimes you can forget stuff. See whether you can find good voice transcription tools that are going to help make that process more easy. Bookkeeping. Keep in mind that, have a look at what's going on in your finance department. Have you got a lot of manual processes that are going on there? Think about what you could do to automate it. In many situations, you can automate invoices coming into the office that can go directly into your bookkeeping system without being manually entered. These things are going to take a lot of upfront time, and there's going to be, your finance people are going to have to spend time in order to get that set up, and sometimes it can be really frustrating as well too. So they may not have taken the time because they're not sure whether it's going to be worth the return on investment, but please do keep in mind that there are a lot of automation options out there, and your finance team may be able to automate some things so they can spend time on things that are more important to the association and more value to members. I'm going to talk about checks, and I know this seems very old-fashioned to many of you, maybe most of you who got rid of checks a long time ago, but we are still seeing associations using checks. They're sending out checks, they're receiving checks. Number one, there is no need to be sending checks to anybody. If your suppliers will go with how you choose to pay them. So go to your suppliers and tell them you're sending electronic funds transfer, EFT, get their banking information, and get rid of sending checks out the door. In terms of inbound information, you may have to accept checks. If you've got corporate members for whom checks are just what they need to do, there's going to be some of those, but try to reduce that. Try to make sure that those who can are paying you via electronic funds transfer or by credit card. Try to eliminate checks. They are literally way more expensive than EFT, way more time consuming. There's way more cat herding, and there's way more opportunity for loss, failure, or error. So if this is the year that you are still doing checks, get rid of them. Make sure 2024 sees no more checks coming in or going out of your organization wherever possible. Now, I want to talk briefly about software here. It is a common problem with associations who feel that they're struggling for resources. I can't afford to invest in that piece of software. I know it would be great if we had it. It would really make things easier for our staff, but we can't afford to spend that, $100 a month or $2,000 a year or that $5,000 upfront investment. Keep in mind that even if all of your staff were on minimum wage, if they're spinning their wheels on things that could be automated, that is stuff that they are not doing that the members see. The members don't care about the fact that you're saving money by doing things manually instead of having software to solve them. In fact, they would probably be rather disappointed in you as an organization if you're way behind in terms of the tools that are already out there. So when you think about whatever you're spending per hour on an individual employee, if they are wasting even a few hours a week doing something that could be automated, and could be handled via software, it means that you're not only wasting money, but you're increasing the chance of error. So talk to your people, talk about what they could do to where they are wasting time, what you could do to make them more efficient. This is true of hardware as well too. Are you using old software that needs to be updated? Are you using old machines where it's taking people a long time to be doing their work? Talk to them. Also keep in mind with automation, you're going to have some people in your organization that actually like doing things manually. I've seen it a lot of times before. And sometimes you've got Betty who's been doing things the same way all of her working life, and she's got 20 years under her belt and she does not want to change. Keep in mind, if people don't want to change, maybe it's time for you to make a change. Be on top of things and make sure that you're using the automating tools that you can afford. Also encourage you to think about committee self-management. There is a tendency, and we're all vulnerable to this, that we take on new ideas, but we don't get rid of anything that we're already doing. So we become increasingly more and more stretched thin because our resources don't go up, but we're adding more initiatives, we're adding more committees, and every single committee needs to be managed. And that can be an awful lot of work. So if you've got a committee that is already being supported by the organization, it is tough to pull that away. When they're used to that support and you take it away, that can be challenging for the people that are on that committee. But at the very least, if you're going to strike new committees, make sure that you, wherever possible, can make them self-managed. Give them training in how to set an agenda up. You should be organizing the meetings for them, but make sure it's not one of those things where every meeting is ad hoc and you've got to doodle the world to get it set up. Give them a specific date and time, the third Wednesday of the month at 10 a.m., and that's what's going to be set up for them. And then if they need to change individual meetings, they can reach out to you to do that. But when it comes to the agendas and it comes to the meeting notes, give them some training, give them some templates. Don't expect them to do as good a job or as thorough a job as you would, but keep in mind that anything that they are doing to self-manage is helping to get the job done without adding extra work to you. Make sure that it's important that you at the association know what was on the committee agenda and you know what was in the meeting notes. So before each meeting, you've got to give them some guidance. Hey, here's some things that we need from you, membership committee. Here's some decisions we need to make. Event committee, we need the dates for the spring event. Make sure that they know in advance what conclusions they have to come to when they have their committee meeting. Leave it to them, then read the notes afterwards. And if you see any red flags, call up the chairman and just have a quick conversation with them. Now, let's talk about efficiency and in particular, AI. There are a lot of opportunities to use AI for things that used to be done very manually before. If you're an association that regularly sends out tidbits to your members, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly, about what the latest headlines are, what the latest research is, and what you've been doing in the past is trolling through, whatever the tool is that you use on the internet to find that information. AI may help you to get that information more quickly. It may help you to get a short list shorter for your curated content. So think about how you can use that internally. I know it's always a challenge. You're always under the gun. You've got barely enough time to do it yourself, let alone to take time to figure out how an AI tool might be able to help you to do it faster. But it's worthwhile investment. And if you don't, you're very quickly going to get behind. When it comes to your members, keep in mind that, remember we said earlier, you've got to make sure that you're out in front of AI, because if it's affecting your members, they're going to look to you for leadership and they're going to expect you to know what's going on and to bring in people that can help them understand what's going on. I think one of the key issues with AI is making sure that you're transparent. Where are you using AI? How is it being used? And also make sure that you are doing your due diligence. Remember, AI is not meant to be an end in itself. It's meant to help speed up the initial part of the undertaking. It still is going to require human knowledge, human effort, and human judgment before anything gets published. So it's not there for publishing purposes. It's there to help you to get closer to your initial analysis before you publish. So let's just summarize things. We talked about risk mitigation. Focus on insurance this year. Make sure that you are adequately covered. Do a full sweep on all of your insurance. AI, get out in front of it. Figure out what you can use it for in your association and what your members need to know. Make sure that you've got a reboot on your AR plan, or your HR plan, that you've got a good training and onboarding plan. Probably are going to need it more over the next few years than you ever have before, and you're focusing on retention on HR. Also focus on retention of sponsors and members. Yes, you do need new ones. That's all important. But make sure you don't lose sight of delivering awesome value to your sponsors and your members. Remember, word of the day, retention, retention, retention. We talked about opportunities. Focus on opportunities for member engagement and communication. Think about rallying around a cause. How can you get your members focused and interested in what's the cause going to be for 2024? And make sure, if you're doing government relations, try to build that cause into what you're doing on the GR front. So you're not duplicating effort into two different areas. Try not to spread yourself too thin. Think about how you can promote, train, and delegate to younger members to give them a bigger voice and help them to attract more people that look like them. Government relations and stakeholder relations, as always, demonstrate your value. Why should they listen to you? What's in it for them? Make sure there is something for them in talking to you. And let's focus on efficiency. What can you do to get more out of the resources that you've already got internally? And what can you do about AI, not just for yourself as an association, but also for your members? So in terms of next steps, if you've got a current strategic plan that is not expired yet, think about reviewing it. Does it need some tweaking? Does it need some adjustment? Make sure that you focus on mitigating your risk and seizing your opportunities, and retention, retention, retention. If you do want some help, talk to us about helping with strategic planning and with member engagement and retention. Now what I'd like to do is to go to live Q&A. I can see we've got a fair number of questions in chat, and I know that we have received some other ones earlier as well. So over to you, Kevin. What's our first question?
Thanks, Erin. So our first question is, how are associations going forward with board meetings and conferences?
Okay, I'm going to assume that that question relates to how they are being held in terms of whether it's in person or whether it's virtual. I would say that since the end of the pandemic, we've seen more board meetings continue on with virtual when otherwise they would have been in person. So I think people are more inclined to go virtual than they were before. However, it depends on your association and the type of people you've got in your association. I know that I've heard from a number of associations that they really found that their people just do not relate well to a virtual board meeting, and people were drifting off and they weren't contributing. When they get them around a table in person, they get way higher productivity. So just keep in mind, you know, what is the nature of the people that are on your board.
So second question is, are hybrid conferences dead?
Well, I think hybrid conferences are an excellent idea. The challenge is twofold. Number one, the cost of doing it. And not every association has the ability to do that. It takes an enormous amount of effort on the part of the planners and a considerable amount of cost. So the question is, are you getting a return on that? The second thing is cannibalizing your in-person events. By offering hybrid, are you giving people a choice who could easily get to the conference, but maybe will decide not to, and maybe won't be as engaged in the conference because they're kind of listening to it off the end of their desktop. So the expense is a consideration, and that's probably the biggest consideration right now.
So how will a recession impact associations?
Well, that was one of the risks that we talked about, is member and sponsor losses. If we have a recession, and that's not what the pundits are saying, but they're certainly not expecting anything meaningful in the way of growth. That means that where people were in a tight financial position before, whether it's a company or whether it's an individual, one of the things they're going to be looking at is what they're paying for association fees. So that always happens in any situation. We're not in a 2008, 2009 situation right now, but that's why focus on retention is absolutely critical.
So fourth question is, curious to hear your thoughts on the return of in-person events. Are employers open to paying for travel and time spent at the events?
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about in-person events. We are seeing mixed results. I would say overall, most of the people I talk to are seeing lower turnout at in-person events than they were before, but there are exceptions. I've definitely heard people saying, no, wow, we had a great turnout. Everything's been great. So I think the jury's out on what's going on with in-person events. But me, anecdotally, I've heard more people say that they have reduced turnout than they have a larger turnout. So that's a consideration. The second part of the question is about employers being willing to pay for their staff to attend events. I think for the most part, we've seen most organizations seem to have reinstated professional development budgets that had been completely cut off before. But even if they've reinstated them to their previous level, keep in mind that travel costs have gone up significantly. So even if they've gone back to the same budget that they had before, that budget isn't going to go as far. So that's something to consider. You know, even if you've somehow managed to keep the cost of your confirmation, your registration cost at a relatively low level, they've still got to get there, and they've still got to pay for their hotel once they're there.
All right, next question is, I would appreciate your views on the use of AI and cybersecurity risks.
Well, we talked about AI earlier, and I think there's two things that you need to be thinking about with respect to AI. Number one, how can you use AI internally at your association to increase efficiency? And secondly, how is AI affecting your membership, and how can you get out in front of it to make sure that your members know what they need to know about how it's affecting their profession or their industry? In terms of cybersecurity, please keep in mind what I said earlier, insurance. If you have not looked at your insurance in a year or two, look at it very, very, very thoroughly this year. It's really important that you and your board know absolutely what you are insured for, what you're not insured for, what are the exclusions, what are the caps. Make sure that you've got a really good broker who can sit down with you and provide that. And if you're not getting those answers, go elsewhere. You can't afford to be in the dark about this.
So what are some unique things that associations are doing to attract and retain younger members?
I'm only struggling a little bit with the word unique, because I'm not sure that anything I'm seeing where it's having success really is unique. but it comes down to the same several things that we said earlier. First of all, reach out to people. If you've got some younger members that you think could take a leadership position, pick up the phone and call them. Tell them how good you think they would be at it and how important they are. And don't say, look, we need a young person on the board or we need a young person on the committee. That's just, it makes them feel like it's tokenism. Explain why you think they would be a good leader. And then give them the training in order to do that. Let them know they may feel intimidated or inhibited by taking on that role. Or they might say, yeah, I'll take on that role, but then they get there and they don't do anything because they're afraid to speak. Make sure that you give them some training and some mentoring so that they can be their best selves in that role. And also make sure, don't give them a token position that has no ability to make any change. Delegate. Give them the opportunity to make change within your association. If you don't have enough younger members, it's probably because change needs to happen. So give them boundaries and then give them freedom within those boundaries to make change and accomplish things.
Next question is, are there any trends expected for events in 2024?
Well, I would reiterate what I said earlier, which is I feel like in-person events remain vulnerable. Now, on the other hand, we used to during the pandemic, we used to get tons of people showing up for virtual events, but I'm seeing a downturn in that as well too, because people are doing so much virtually right now. They're sick of the screen. So I would say events are vulnerable. That's the short answer.
Do you have any suggestions for meeting scheduling tools?
No, is the short answer. I don't. We use Doodle and don't love it, but it seems to be the only tool that we've used that we can actually speak to. I know there are others out there, and that's something that we need to focus on this year.
Next question is, what are some tools that you would recommend for increasing efficiency and using AI?
Well, first of all, keep in mind that whatever AI tool you choose to use, make sure that you are using a version of it, which probably means paying for it, where the information that you are putting into it does not become part of the public domain. So like I said, I am no expert in AI, but one of the things you've got to make sure is that however you're using it, your information is not ending up in the public domain. So be aware of that. Think about what efficiencies you could accomplish internally. If you're doing a lot of internet research, if that's part of the value you're delivering to members, it might be helpful in that regard. If that's not the case, then it may not be worthwhile investing in a lot of time internally. But keeping in mind, just from an efficiency perspective internally, I know that for some of our clients, from a price perspective, they said, well, we know we need a membership database, and here's the one we're going to use because it's the most cost effective. But then they end up fiddling around and spending a whole lot of time trying to rejig the fact that it's just not a very good tool. And for a slight increase in monthly cost, they can save a lot of time. So I don't have any specific tools to recommend, but I certainly do recommend that you do some investigation. And one way that I've found is really useful is we are members of CSAE, and we are active on the CSAE discussion forum. So if you're looking for tools, I really do encourage you to use that discussion forum and find out what other people are using and what their experience has been. People are very helpful and very willing to respond on that forum.
This question is it reasonable to apply a small surcharge to incoming checks to entice senders to use e-transfer instead?
Yeah, really good point. Well, first of all, if you're talking about your suppliers, I mean, these are the people that are serving you. You're paying them. So you shouldn't have to ask them. You should just say, hey, by the way, you're going to get paid by EFT. They don't have to do anything at your end. They just send you their banking information and you do it. So I would encourage you with all of your suppliers, don't ask, tell. Now, if it's your members, I would not encourage you to put a surcharge on checks. I mean, let's face it. It's always a challenge to make sure members are going to renew. Don't make it more difficult for them, but do make it easier for them to pay by credit card. So anything you can do to make it simple and easy for them to pay by EFT, use any incentives that you can to encourage them to get onto that program. Because at their end, I'm still puzzled why any corporate entity, no matter how small, would prefer to pay by check instead of by EFT. So I think it's just more a question of their finance people have gotten into a rut, and you need to get to the decision makers to help them get their finance people out of that rut. Kevin, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Aaron. So last question that we received is, how do I go about using AI if I haven't really gone in that direction at all?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I would, first of all, if you're doing research and you're doing curation, it's probably something that you want to be looking at. If you're not doing a lot of writing or a lot of research, maybe it's not something that is worth investigating for you as an association. But you do need to be thinking about, is it something I should be investigating for my members, because it's something that's coming up. I would just encourage you to go to all of the forums that you have access to, including the CSAE discussion forum, and start by asking people what they're using. And there's a lot of early adopters out there in our community, and I know that they would be happy to talk about it. And it's something that we do need to discuss more internally. And I see a message here, having a separate webinar on how to use AI for associations. Great idea. I'd like to be all over that. Do we have any more questions, Kevin?
No, we do not.
All right. Well, please keep in mind our next live webinar is on February 8th. It's all about member engagement, what you need to know. Like this one, that webinar is eligible for 1 CAE credit if you are a CAE charter holder. Next steps, Kevin will follow up with you for your feedback. Thanks very much for Carolyn from the suggestion to have a separate webinar on AI. We would love to hear your suggestions for future events.